Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, what is hit and run OCD? So this term, hit and run OCD, refers to a type of obsession we sometimes see with obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's also referred to as MVA OCD, or motor vehicle accident OCD. And as I mentioned, it's a type of obsession we see. It's not particularly common, but I have seen it several times. And it has a different set of consequences than a lot of the other obsessions we see with OCD. So taking a quick look at OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder has obsessions, which are intrusive thoughts, and or compulsions. And compulsions would be behaviors that in theory would relieve anxiety. So there's a lot of variety with the types of obsessions we see with OCD. Some are checking obsessions, others are based on contamination, and others strictly intrusive thoughts. There are other categories as well for obsessions. This particular obsession of the concern over hitting somebody with a car is really a type of checking obsession, but it could also be an intrusive thought. Now, when talking about obsessions in OCD, it's important to recognize there's a wide variety of obsessions. And a number of these obsessions look like symptoms of an anxiety disorder or depressive disorder. This hit and run type obsession is no exception. Now, with OCD, we have a lot of comorbidity. About 76% of individuals with OCD over their lifetime will also have an anxiety disorder, and about 63% will have a depressive disorder. Now, OCD is different than obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, although 25% of individuals with OCD will also have obsessive-compulsive personality disorder at some point in their life. It's also important to recognize that if somebody has this motor vehicle related obsession, that doesn't mean they necessarily have obsessive-compulsive disorder. There are other symptom criteria in order to be diagnosed with OCD. For example, the obsessions or compulsions have to be time-consuming, and there needs to be clinically significant distress. There are other requirements as well. So again, having this obsession doesn't mean OCD is present, it's just a type of obsession we sometimes see. So let's look at the characteristics of this particular obsession. It's not the same thing as a fear of driving, and it's not a fear of having a panic attack while driving. Specifically, it's a fear of the consequences of hitting usually a pedestrian, but it could also be a pet or even an object or another car. The way we typically see this manifest is in terms of a pedestrian, and oftentimes the thought is that a child was hit with a car. So somebody with this particular obsession may be driving down the road, and they may hear a sound or hit a pothole and believe that they've hit a child. Now, in the United States, we drive on the right side of the road, so what I usually see here is that somebody's focused on the right side of their car. So they may be more attentive to somebody that could be coming from the shoulder or the sidewalk into the roadway from the right side. So they hear a sound, again hit a pothole, something like that, and they believe that they may have struck a pedestrian, and again specifically, oftentimes it's a child. Now, the first thing they do is check the rearview mirror to see if they see anything, to see if there's evidence that they've struck someone. After that, they may pull over and inspect the passenger side of their vehicle, specifically the front bumper, to look again for any evidence that some sort of accident occurred. After that, they may drive back around and check to see if there's somebody there. They may also listen for sirens, like from the police or an ambulance. They may look on the internet later on to see if there's been an accident reported, or they could check the newspaper. And after that, they may return again to this scene where they think something happened and drive around. This behavior could take hours. Somebody could drive around for hours. They could ask people in the area if they've heard of an accident involving a pedestrian. So there's a clearly disruptive component to this obsession, just like we see with other obsessions. Now, this obsession can also manifest in a variety of other ways, other than a concern over hitting a pedestrian, a child, or a pet. I've also seen this where there's a concern over hitting another car, like in a parking lot. For example, pulling out of a parking space and believing that you have hit another car, and then being worried about the consequences of that, being worried that it was captured on camera and that somebody will show up and complain that their car was damaged, or the police will show up. I've also seen a version of this where somebody's concerned that a part of their car fell off and a car behind them ran over that object and it damaged their car, or it caused an accident, like they went off the side of the road and hit something. On occasion, we also see a version of this where somebody's concerned about traffic cameras. So this is a bit different than a concern about hitting a pedestrian, but we see these traffic cameras, sometimes called red light cameras, that take a picture of vehicles, in theory, that went through a red light. And there can be concern when somebody with this obsession drives through an intersection where the light was yellow. They can check the internet to see if that intersection had a red light camera, or they may drive back to that traffic light and drive around and look for evidence that a camera is present. For example, check telephone poles and see if there's some camera affixed to those poles or some other structure indicating the presence of a camera. So this is a bit different, again, than the fear of hitting an individual, but it's another motor vehicle related obsession. Now, the fear with a lot of these motor vehicle related obsessions is the fear of going to jail, the fear of disappointing family members, the fear of losing one's job because they may have hit a pedestrian, and that of course would have a criminal component to it, or could, and a fear of guilt, fear of having to live with the guilt of hitting a pedestrian. Now, sometimes we also see what I refer to as a secondary obsession, and really it's just another obsession that occurs after this motor vehicle related obsession, where because someone has checked their car and because they've checked the internet to see if there's been a pedestrian hit, and because they drove around and asked a lot of other people if this accident occurred, they look guilty. So usually after all this checking, they believe that they didn't actually strike someone, but now there's this fear that they look guilty because of all these behaviors, because of all these checking behaviors. So this secondary obsession becomes worried that because they looked guilty, that somebody will think they're guilty. It's really a fear of being falsely accused of hitting someone or of having caused an accident. So what are the consequences of this obsession? Well, there are a variety of consequences here. One is that the individual who has this obsession could be increasing the risk of an accident by driving around the area where they thought they hit somebody. Also, there's a tendency when somebody's driving around like this to park or stop their car in unusual places to investigate what they thought was an accident scene. So there is a risk of actually causing a real accident when investigating this accident that didn't happen. Other consequences include the avoiding of driving in the future, only driving in the daylight or good weather conditions, and only driving with the passenger. The idea here is the passenger can look out for potential accidents and help the individual to verify they did not actually cause an accident, that they didn't actually hit a pedestrian. This hit and run obsession or motor vehicle obsession can of course be problematic. As I mentioned, it can be an obsession we see with OCD if it meets the other criteria for obsessive-compulsive disorder, and it has really negative consequences potentially. It can be a serious type of obsession in that it can actually sometimes cause an accident. I hope you found this description of hit and run obsessions to be interesting. Thanks for watching.